look at an example of how this is done. All Christians do it in the exact same way, but this example is fairly typical and touches most of the normal bases. Join me as we examine how Christians invent He rebelled against God and got thrown down from heaven. He tempted Adam and Eve. He's the father of lies and the ultimate enemy of God and humanity. There was a lot of very specific lore surrounding this character. But as I got older and looked more closely at the Bible, I came to realize that pretty much none of this stuff about the devil was anywhere in there. And by all appearances, it had been made up and passed along by people in my church. Pure post-biblical tradition, at best pulled from tenuous interpretations of Scripture, and the Bible itself says very little about a specific devil character. Satan, or the devil, is often translated from Greek or Hebrew expressions that aren't the name of a specific being and are just common nouns used to describe an enemy or deceiver, such as when Jesus called Peter Satan for trying to mislead him, or an ill-defined accuser character was allowed to freely walk into God's heavenly court and verbally spar with him, which is a strange situation to find the traditional devil in, considering he's the mortal enemy of our souls and had been banished from heaven. References to an actual devil character as we understand him are entirely absent from the Old Testament and appear only as sporadic and vague allusions in the New Testament, never forming any clear picture of a specific character with well-defined traits. Why do so many fundamentalists, who claim the Bible is their sole authority on all theological matters, incorporate so much non-biblical devil mythology into their religion? Phenomenon, and today we'll look at an example of how this is done. Of course, not all Christians do it in the exact same way, but this example is fairly typical and touches most of the normal bases. Join me as we examine how Christians invent the devil. The incredible Latin chant of my theme song was performed by Martin McKee. So thank you, Martin. Something much less incredible, let's watch our old friend Doug Prophecy explain stuff about the devil.
In this video, you will learn about the rise and fall of Lucifer, also known as the devil or Satan.
Oh, so we're not watching The Empire Strikes Back. Go back and listen to the first 3 bars of his background music and you'll understand my confusion.
You will discover his subtle strategies to defeat you. Make sure you stay to the end, where you will learn how you can be victorious.
So apparently there's a powerful, malevolent spiritual being out to get you. Yet God, who's omnipotent, all-knowing, and perfectly good, is content to sit back and let your fate rest on what some doofy YouTuber tells you, to the extent that you're more or less f***ed if you don't make it to the end of his video. Right.
Hi everyone, this is Dustin with Hope Through Prophecy. We're about to throw the spotlight on the glorious rise and tragic fall of a good angel gone bad.
Jokes about his mom are beneath me.
First, if you would like to better understand Bible prophecy and be prepared for the soon return of Jesus, I hope you will quickly subscribe and click the bell icon below so you don't miss any of my future uploads.
Okay, this is just gross. Yes, hyping your channel is totally normal, and in fact you're kind of silly if you don't do it, which probably makes me a little silly. Ask people to like and subscribe without trying to scare them into it. And as a former evangelical, I can tell you that's what he's doing. For many believers, allusions to the soon return of Jesus, and I still don't know why he says it like that, conjure a lot of apocalyptic possibilities, including natural disasters, monsters, persecution, the mark of the beast, and on-the-spot decisions that can result in eternal damnation. So when Dustin here tells people he has key information about prophecies and that his audience will want to subscribe so they catch every vital detail, he's using a deeply ingrained fear, that of getting caught off guard for the end times, to coax subscriptions and watch time out of his audience. Yes, I suppose we can give him the benefit of the doubt and say he's just pleading with his audience out of a sense of urgency about what he sincerely believes. But the whole thing just has kind of a sleazy feel to it, especially considering the emphasis on going to him for information.
Many see the chaos, confusion, and death in this world.
Was that footage pulled from a video game? I'm not sure, and it doesn't have much to do with anything, but it seems weird.
And ask, how could a God of love allow this? To answer this, we must first travel back to the courts of heaven, where we discover the origins of a being named Lucifer.
Okay, so let's really quickly get this Lucifer thing out of the way. I'm sure most of you know Lucifer is not the name of the devil. It's a Latin name for the planet Venus as it appears brightly in the morning, and it's often rendered into English as Lightbringer or Morning Star. However, there's one place in Isaiah 14 where the King James translators, for some bizarre reason, inserted this Latin word for the original expression instead of translating it into English. This leads many Christians to believe that Lucifer is the proper name of the devil, or at least an angel who would become the devil, even though it's referring to the king of Babylon and has nothing to do with the devil. Interesting illustration of how most current traditions about the devil develop somewhat haphazardly, or through creative post-biblical myth-making, and aren't found in the Bible at all.
Ezekiel 28:15 describes this powerful being. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created. From this verse we learn two things. One, Lucifer is a created being, and two, he was created perfect.
I'm sure you readily notice that the Bible reference cited here is tiny and probably taken out of context. This is par for the course for Dustin, as he has a history of building entire theological points around ellipsis-riddled sentence fragments such as, to make a wait for the wind, or, for it is the number of a man. This time he uses minutia from the...
So that don't even make sense either. If God is perfect, God is a perfect being, and then God creates another perfect being, but his perfect creation rebels against him, then God, you're not fucking perfect.
Read this a Bible verse to establish both that the devil was created and started out perfect. Why? Do such a limited part of the passage. Take half a second to crack open a Bible, it becomes pretty obvious that Ezekiel 28:1-19 is not about the devil at all. It's a combination prophecy and taunt against the king of Tyre, and the verse Dustin quotes is from a description of the king's greatness leading up to an account of his downfall. It's a popular formula of Old Testament prophecy, one other example being the previously discussed Isaiah passage in which Lucifer is mentioned. Like prophets, appealing to a people who are understandably fed up with the domination of foreign kings, would produce these lyric narratives about someone like the king of Tyre or Babylon, essentially saying, you think you're so cool now, but just wait because you're going to get yours in the end. Yes, some of the details of this narrative do sound like they better fit a supernatural being than a human king.
Yo, this is how I feel right now.
Keep in mind that these taunts tend to be sarcastically hyperbolic in their initial description of the king's greatness, so you can't take every word literally.
Y'all don't sit like that.
And some of the descriptions actually don't make sense when applied to the devil. But we'll address those details when Dustin gets to them. So, there's the plain fact that this passage explicitly says it's about the king of Tyre. Christians can argue that there's some dual imagery that applies to both, but why would God write it this way? If there really were a dangerous super angel running around trying to kill and deceive us, why would God only make sideways allusions to him in a passage that says it's about a king and hope someone as smart as Dustin here eventually notices which parts of the prophecy don't add up and conclude that it's a coded reference to the devil? Wouldn't, because it makes no sense. Saw a bear running around the neighborhood, I'd yell to my kids, "Hey, hurry and get inside because there's a bear." And start singing a song about the rise and fall of Hitler, tossing in details about how he had big claws and ate berries and salmon until my kids stopped
What up,
and
though?
think,
How the day going? How everybody's day
Dad
going?
might be talking about a bear. Maybe we should get inside. Ridiculous once you stop and think about it.
The Bible reveals additional information about this perfect being known as Lucifer. Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom, and perfect in beauty. Lucifer was known throughout the courts of heaven as the wisest, most beautiful of all the created beings.
Dustin's reading way too much into some of the hyperbolic language used to describe the king of Tyre. Basically, the first reference from chapter 15 is just saying you were perfect until we found fault with you. Given the format, this doesn't necessarily mean literal perfection, and in fact the NIV renders the word blameless. And the second one is just a glowing review of how beautiful and wise the king was. Again, just glowing mock praise directed at a human king. Using these sparse bits of overstatement to establish the nature of the devil is a huge stretch.
In fact, Lucifer held the highest, most respected position in all of heaven, second only to God himself. He served as the covering cherub, standing in the very courtroom of the God of the universe. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth. We can understand this better by considering the earthly sanctuary service, which was given to God's people on earth as a model or blueprint of God's true sanctuary in heaven. In the most holy place of this sanctuary, there was the Ark of the Covenant, which represents the throne of God. The Ark contains 2 tablets of stone.
But that's the whole thing. I feel you, bro. That's the hardest struggle in the world, is to figure out how not to work for somebody else. I swear. But goddamn, the whole thing with God creating Lucifer and other angels and his court and his kingdom, like, who the fuck needs that? If you are God and you are a perfect being, why would you have to create anything? I just don't get that shit. But God needs an army, he needs his own soldiers, and then he needs a counterpart, an antagonist to fight against and have these battles against darkness and light. And the devil has his own underworld and his own realm and his own army of demons. And it's like, this fucking story is ludicrous. It's his story, that's all it is. Can't believe people really take this shit literally, man, and still believe this shit. The devil and God are at war right now. Like, are they really though? Is it really a devil? I don't know, man. I'm just saying, I can't see this shit in reality nowhere. No matter how much I read the book, I can't see that shit. It's not in reality. It's just a story in a book. And then the story don't fucking make sense. Especially the whole Old Testament. It's like you are omnipresent. You're everywhere at once. And you're omnipotent. You know everything that there is to know. But you still fuck up and make mistakes. It's like, it's like, how can God make mistakes? You are perfect. How can a motherfucker lie to God? How can you lie to God and get away with it? Oh, it's all in God's plans. I mean, how can Satan, Lucifer, the morning star, whatever you want to call, how can this dude have so much power in the world? But you got God. I say all this shit is made up. How did Christians invent the devil?
Off topic, but given the size and overall production value of Dustin's channel, I find the use of this unreadable combination of yellow text over noisy yellow and blue background baffling. Look at it.
The 10 Commandments, the very foundation of his government. On top of the ark sits the mercy seat, where the supernatural presence of God dwelt.
Yeah, but his experiment fucked up. Twice. Well, 3 times. He created the perfect garden and all the animals and man and woman and told them not to do something, and they did it anyway. You're already fucking up. How you didn't know that was gonna happen? Why did you put a magical tree in your fucking garden? How come this magical tree is stronger than you are? How come it's enveloped with all these mystical powers? In the tree, the fruit of the tree is stronger than fucking God. Is that not, am I not making that, is that too complicated? The tree of knowledge of good and evil. Why the fuck did you put it there? So they can touch it. Why didn't you keep it up in heaven with you? How is it that this tree has so much power that it overrides the abilities of God? God, you created a tree that's stronger than you, yourself. And now that whole first experiment, that shit all fucked up. You know what? I'm gonna kick y'all out my fucking garden because y'all can't leave my magical trees alone. Now y'all know too much shit. So fuck up number 1. And then they go killing brothers and each other and all kind of dumbass shit. Then the people wanna build oh no. That was, he fuck up so many times. Fuck up number 1 was the first goddamn people. They fucked shit up because he ain't know no better that imperfect beings were going to act imperfectly. You a dumbass God. Now you punish them for doing normal shit that imperfect beings do. But they gotta get punished for that shit. And then you can't even control the other creations in heaven that you have up there with you, and so the angels decide to ascend or fall to earth and start fucking the women folk on earth because they were beautiful. And then they started making these hybrid ass motherfucking giants and Nephilim and all kind of shit, and you ain't like that. Like you ain't know that shit was gonna fucking happen. You ain't know they was gonna eat the fucking fruit. You ain't know the angels was gonna fuck the women. Your second experiment fucked up. Oh, I'm gonna wash out every living thing on earth that has the breath of life and start over again, except for Noah, because I fucked this shit up all over again. I ain't know the aliens, the angels was gonna fuck all the human women and make giants and shit. Fuck that. Start over again, because I done fucked up. Okay. Alright, Noah, you and your family go do your thing. Oh, now y'all trying to build a tower to the heavens. Word? I ain't know y'all was gonna do that. Why y'all trying to come up to heaven with me? Y'all don't need to come up. You know what? I'm gonna smash your fucking tower. I'm gonna confuse all y'all languages because y'all too organized and nothing that y'all will put y'all mind to won't be from. So now, you know what? Fuck all that shit. I keep fucking this shit up, man. God damn, you know, one more time. Fuck all this shit up. Because I ain't know that was going to happen. Start over again. Now, Moses and the Jew slaves and Pharaoh and Jesus Christ. I ain't know that shit was going to happen. But you know what? Since I done fucked up so many times in the past, I'm going to give birth to myself as a man and walk the earth, and then I'm gonna sacrifice myself to make a loophole for all the other shit that I got wrong in the past. So now you can kill, rape, murder, pillage, and plunder, but right before you die, if you confess all your sins and take Jesus Christ into your heart, then you get a free pass to come to heaven. Because none of this other shit don't work, because motherfuckers don't listen to what I tell them. I've been telling them every time, don't do something, and then they do it anyway, because I don't know better. And over and over and over and over and over and over, God keep fucking up and fucking up and fucking up and fucking up and fucking up. And then you got Satan running around. And then Satan. Come on, man. Don't none of that shit make no sense. None of it. I missed my lip. Don't none of that shit make no damn sense, bro. That shit even, and like I say, even as a child of 7, 8 years old, to me, that shit ain't make sense then. A talking snake, where? I love fucking critters and creatures and small tiny animals that I can crush in my hands. But I ain't never heard a grasshopper talk. I ain't never heard a dog talk. I ain't never heard a motherfucking snake talk. The birds chirp and sing. The motherfuckers don't talk to me though. But you telling me a long time ago, somewhere in northern Africa, a snake was talking? Really? I mean, even as a 7-year-old, I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. Why the dinosaurs piss God off so much? What happened to them? Oh man, real diehard theists. They say dinosaurs never existed because there's no proof of evolution, and scientists hide bones to fool you. And if the bones are real, then it was Satan who put the bones there to confuse man, to make man think the earth is millions of years old, when in actuality the earth is only 6,000 years old. But God do that shit to confuse y'all, because he don't want y'all to know his ultimate plan. Even though he keep fucking up every plan that he sets into motion, he has this ultimate grand scheme, but he ain't gonna fuck that one up though, like he did everything else over and over and over and over, because he work in mysterious ways. That's why my family don't like talking to my ass.
The Shekinah glory was covered by 2 angels with outstretched wings. Lucifer held this prestigious position in heaven. He was to cover and protect God and his holy law.
Oh boy, there were a ton of liberties taken there. Instead of offering any biblical reference showing how angels were assigned to cover God and his law, because I'm pretty sure no such thing is ever said in the Bible, and as a former Christian I find the idea of angels protecting God of all people to be baffling, Dustin just talks about how the Ark of the Covenant was designed, and based on how cherubim statues were placed on it, he weaves his own elaborate body of mythology about how God assigned angels to cover him for some reason. Using nothing more than the meager words, "Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth," which were describing the King of Tyre, he concludes that Lucifer held this position. This whole argument is just bizarre in its sheer audacious lack of effort. One thing we must contend with here. This passage does
mysterious, clandestine, and goddamn conspiratorial ways is how the government works. That shit is very, very mysterious indeed.
someone as a cherub, and the King of Tyre, well, was clearly a human and not a cherub, right? What do we make of that? Isn't it weird, perhaps a bit of a stretch, to contend that the anointed cherub that covereth was symbolic language for a human being? And isn't it more likely that this is drifting toward symbolic allusion to the fallen angel Lucifer? Well, no. When we step outside Dustin's carefully selected snippets, we find that his practice of getting literal about details can be a two-edged sword. 13 places the character in the Garden of Eden before his fall, and this seems questionable in light of biblical timelines. Asked Dustin, was the devil engaging in commerce before the fall? Was he obtaining gold and silver through trade? Was this growing wealth what caused him to become proud? That's what verses 4 and 5 say happened. And there are other indications that this character lived in and fell from his glorious state well into before the fall.
And this is something else right here too, yo. So Jose, Jose Cuervo. Oh shit. I feel slightly Spanish every time I say that shit. With thy wisdom and with thine understanding, thou hast gotten the riches, and has gotten gold and silver into thy treasures. By the great wisdom and by the traffic hast thou increased thy riches, and thine heart is lifted up because of thy riches. So do Satan need gold and riches? And why God always worried about gold? That should go to the second page of the Bible. In the second page, they talk about gold. Never understood that shit. I question everybody about that shit. Why is gold so important to God? God seemed too human to me, yo. He seems made up.
Obtaining gold and silver through trade? Is growing wealth what caused him to become proud? What verses 4 and 5 say happened. There are other indications that this character lived in and fell from his glorious state well into human history. There are multiple references to kings and nations seeing his downfall. And while we can maybe stretch and say that some of these are references to the devil's ultimate demise at the end of time, verses 16 and 17 depict him being expelled from the Mount of God and thrown to earth in front of kings. Very little of this sounds like the devil being thrown from heaven in time to be down in Eden deceiving Adam and Eve. Well, this chapter describes its subject using a sloppy slapdash of imagery with allusions that run so all over the map and timeline that their details are hard to construe as anything other than loose hyperbole. Considering that, it's reasonable to suspect that this part of Ezekiel is referring to the person it explicitly says it's referring to? I mean, Jesus Christ, Dustin. For a biblical literalist, you try really hard not to take the Bible literally.
So what happened? What led to Lucifer's fall? Ezekiel reveals the cause of this great rebellion. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty.
Of course, as I already mentioned, Ezekiel also said that he grew proud because of the gold and silver he accumulated through commerce. But we're not going to talk about that one, because it doesn't sound like it's about the devil.
Isaiah provides further details. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High. Lucifer was guilty of pride. Because of his great beauty and intelligence, he thought he could be like God himself.
This passage he just read, which he did...
Like I say, Genesis chapter 1 or 2 is like the second page, depending on how big your Bible is, how big the pages are. Shit. It says that the river split into two. And one was called Pishon, and one was called something that encircled the whole land of Havilah. And there was, in Havilah, there was onyx, beryllium, and some other mineral, and gold. And the gold was good, is what the Bible says. It denotes the quality of the gold. Why does God give a fuck about minerals and a high quality of gold being anywhere when you're God? You could have made the whole fucking world out of gold, if that's what you like. But no, early on, you just want to make sure that you let everybody know that the perfect Garden of Eden had everything, even rich minerals and ores like gold. That shit is the thinking of a man, of humans.
The decide for some reason is from the Isaiah 14 taunt against the king of Babylon, which I already discussed. So like Ezekiel's taunt against the king of Tyre, it has no connection to the devil, except in the minds of imaginative Christians.
Ezekiel 28:15 reads, Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee. The Bible defines iniquity or sin as the breaking of the law. Sin is the transgression of the law. So we can see that Lucifer was guilty of breaking the very law that he was supposed to cover and protect.
Essentially, this is a long, unnecessarily elaborate way of saying the devil disobeyed God, embellished by a made-up story about the devil betraying a law that didn't even exist yet, based entirely on symbolism Dustin reads into the Ark of the Covenant. It's nothing about the devil, and as I've already explained, it's just a creative cobbling together of references to things that have nothing to do with the devil.
Did God?
And that's what I say to any woman. Like when I talk to women about religion, and if they really like believe the Bible and claim to be Christian, I'm like, how can you adhere to such a misogynistic doctrine, such a masculine doctrine that actually undermines the woman in almost every way? Like, how do you cope with that shit and still think this is the word of your God that makes you so much lesser than a man, so much lesser? You're basically property. Oh, it was back then, and things are different, and then a man, and then they got to start like rationalizing that shit. And that shit don't never work. The Bible say that woman came from man. You never seen a man put forth life, yo. That shit just don't happen in nature. I think the seahorse, the male carries the fucking babies. But that's still on like some weird kind of reverse type shit where I would have to look that little shit up about seahorses again, but it's something like the male fertilizes the eggs from the female, but then somehow he carries the eggs. It's weird as shit, but anyway. And with humans, men don't put forth life, women put forth life. But the Bible will tell you that man came first, and then a woman came from a man. And that the woman committed the first sin and all this other shit and the female caused the fall of man, and that's why everything is so fucking hard now. It's all because of the fucking woman. And they just eat that shit up and go right along with it. That shit is weird as hell. Right. They don't want to acknowledge that part though, because things are different now, and we're under the new covenant and Jesus, and even even with the Jesus story, motherfuckers still don't live like that. You know, that's why the Hasidic Jews and some of the Muslims, they religion hardcore, because they really try to adhere to the ancient customs. Like, and you have some motherfuckers who do that shit, like completely like they was doing it 1,000 years ago. But with modern Christians and most religions, anyway, like shit is different and things change, and they try to interpret the doctrines in a different way and make it seem a little bit lighter because we're living in different times now. But they say if it was a pure doctrine, it would be timeless. And nothing would ever change because it would be perfect.
The devil?
Yeah. Oh, because he only created Lucifer, who at that time was a good and righteous angel, but he also... And it was Lucifer himself who used his free will to become the devil. But go ahead, Dustin.
Is no. God created Lucifer the same way he makes all of his creatures, with free will. Choose either to obey him or reject him. He desires his creatures to follow him out of love, not because they are forced.
Yep, so predictable. This knee-jerk, all-purpose excuse for everything bad in the universe makes no sense. The most basic reason being that God made Lucifer knowing everything he would become as the result of the nature God had given him. However, Lucifer was not the devil, from a certain point of view. God didn't create the devil. Apologetics are as good as the semantics George Lucas uses to reconcile two of his movies. It's time to stop and think about your life.
So what happened next? We read of the epic results of Lucifer's rebellion in the book of Revelation. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out.
So is he a dragon, or is he a serpent? Or does he walk in human form like a man, like God and the angels do sometimes? This motherfucker, mighty morphin, shape shifting, lizard being. What the fuck is Satan? How come a dragon, a talking snake, a fallen angel? Yeah. 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 Okay. I agree, nigga. Shit. Let me in. I get to heaven now? Okay, cool. Jesus? Cool. Whatever. I agree. The Bible? Yeah. It's all good, man. I'm good now? I'm good? Okay. I click yes, motherfucker. I just want to get to the good part. That shit is so fucking true, bro. So true. Like, where in the fuck? That's why I need to keep my shit organized, yo, cause sons of a bitch. What? Damn it, man. Can't find my fucking paint.
Old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Here we see a great battle in the courts of heaven. Satan, along with the angels he deceived, is cast down to this earth.
Now, this whole thing about the devil and a bunch of angels being thrown from heaven is a popular piece of post-biblical Christian lore. But you might be wondering, why is Dustin looking to Revelation, at the end of the Bible, for a story about the fall of Lucifer? Be found in Genesis? Well, the Bible isn't always chronological. It turns out this is a good question. Because if we look across the entirety of Revelation 12, we find that, once more, any excursion outside Dustin's carefully selected quotes reveals that he either vastly misrepresented or grossly misunderstood the passage from which he pulled them. Scripture is not describing Lucifer's first rebellion and initial fall. Weird, disjointed narrative about a woman who gets chased around by a dragon after giving birth.
Oh my god, I'm about to dry myself.
Different interpretations of what it's supposed to mean.
What the hell?
Childhood Church took it as a prophecy about the persecution of end-times Christians, while Dustin himself, in an earlier video about the Antichrist, said it was the story of Satan-inspired Rome chasing Mary and baby Jesus. In either event, the passage is very clear about the fact that the dragon fights against Michael and gets thrown down from heaven after the woman gives birth. I can't think of any intelligible interpretation of this passage that places it at the devil's pre-Eden fall, at least not without relying so heavily on symbolism that everything you say is pure self-generated speculation anyway. It's nonsense, and it's clear that Dustin brings as much to the text as he gets from it. Well, he can't even keep his interpretations consistent from one video to the next.
Some ask the question, why didn't God just destroy Lucifer and the fallen angels right then and there? If God would have destroyed Satan and his angels at that time, then the rest of the universe would obey God out of fear rather than love.
If we obey God, we go to heaven, and if we disobey Him, we go to hell. So the whole system weighs pretty heavily on fear to begin with. So, since the devil is supposed to get destroyed in the end, he's already being held up as an example of what happens if you f with God. Eliminating him now, before he has the chance to wreak havoc on humanity, make us fear God more than telling us he's going to eliminate him later.
There would still be unanswered questions. Is God fair, loving, and good? Can his law be fully obeyed? And does it lead to true happiness? Satan had raised these questions in his rebellion, and they needed to be fully answered so that sin would never rise again. God, in his perfect wisdom, knew that he would have to allow sin to run its course so that the entire universe could see the results of sin and decide for themselves if God is good.
So how does the devil, temporarily going unpunished, do anything to answer these philosophical questions? Letting an evil being run around causing destruction the best way to provide clear answers? Wouldn't an omnipotent God instead explain himself perfectly well in a way that would convince his creation? What happened if the devil had never sinned in the first place? Would God then have never been able to help us understand his nature and the nature of sin?
All right, no more.
Probably necessary for helping us understand
I need
God?
a snack real quick.
As far as all this goes, isn't the devil supposed to deceive us into misunderstanding God? Sounds like Dustin is saying that having an ultra-intelligent father of lies running rampant through the universe actually gives us a clearer understanding of God, which is weird and undermines his entire role as a threat to humanity. So that it's pretty standard to come up with some convoluted reason that the all-powerful God's only option was to work through something horrible, instead of, doing anything intelligent about the situation, but this is just next-level stupid. Point, I'm done. He's already run through his core arguments about what the devil is and why God created him and allows him to run free. And from here he just runs through a rapid-fire series of mundane statements about the devil. He's a murderer, he doesn't have horns and a pitchfork, as if that's the point where the idea got idiotic. He can appear however he wants and so on, before meandering through standard churchy exhortations about resisting the devil and leaning on Christ. All too boring to extend this video or make a part 2 about. The devil is like God, and that people will make him whatever they want him to be. It doesn't matter that the whole idea is not only not in the Bible but idiotic. I mean, seriously, why would an all-powerful God just not have contained the devil from the start? And who would ever rebel against a God who was not only all-powerful but knew you were going to rebel before you did? Because people need an adversary. Because they want to feel like something is loving them and blessing them and guiding them, they also want something to personify the sense of foreboding and evil, to be the source of everything that frustrates or even disagrees with them. This, of course, can't be God. The devil forms in their mind just as God did. For their own ego that they misunderstand, blow out of proportion, and use to tie together all the randomness they see around them. The devil in here somewhere, and they need it to be something real out there. So if the Bible didn't provide one for them, they'll just make one up. Get familiar with the tools that people use to put him in your head, maybe you can start getting him out. And that's a good step towards seeing the world for what it is.
I'm not even trying to make this shit up. I had a banana and an apple today. And I had fish for lunch. Not making it up, bro. I ate some fruit today. You know what I'm saying? I don't have any more bananas. But I do have like one apple left. And some grapes, I think. It's not a big deal, man. I balanced that shit out, man. I still can't get off my junk food though. It's delicious, man. I've been eating Cool Ranch Doritos since they've been making Cool Ranch Doritos. Ooh. Get some fruit, nigga. You ain't got no melons, some cantaloupe, some watermelon. You ain't got no mangoes. You know what I could actually go for, yo? Motherfucking pomegranate. They had one of them bitches in some years now. It's like, I'm so far up north, yo. That's not like a big thing up here, yo. They only got like regular fruit up here, really. Like average fruit. I go down south, man, I marks be having dragon fruit, star fruit, pomegranates, all kind of shit, yo. I'm gonna eat that. I got a meal and no deal. I've really been trying to watch my diet lately too, yo, man. Just trying to maintain a steady weight. Cause I don't know, eating a lot of junk food and snack cakes and sugars and shit, man. I be gaining like 2 pounds of just fat, yo. Like that shit be weird as shit. Like I can gain 2 pounds, 2 or 3 pounds of fat. I mean, no muscle growth. It's like, what the fuck, yo? I gotta stop eating the fucking snacks so much. If I'm trying to gain 2 pounds of muscle, and it's harder to lose muscle. You know what I'm saying? The more muscle mass you have, you know, the less fat content you can hold. But I be getting this shit right here. And it don't look like much, but I be feeling that. Like, that's just like flab, yep. That shit is weird as shit. That's like just a pound of fat. Ain't no muscle in that bitch. I don't be wanting that shit. I need my skin to be tight to the muscle. Hey, chips. I gotta have me a sandwich somewhere. I need some bread and some turkey and mayonnaise, lettuce somewhere. I just can't do chips by itself.
Manage your team's work easily with Monday.com. Just go to Monday.com and start tracking any project or workflow in minutes. Yeah, minutes. What? You don't believe me because I'm an actor?
With your own experience.
Hey, wait, this reminds me of, when you talk about that island, that private island, you know, North Sentinel Island?
Yeah.
Planes still fly over that, or no? Are they not allowed to fly over that? Is it restricted airspace?
I don't think it's restricted, no. But you can't land there, and you can't circle.
Right.
You can't visit.
India owns it, right? Doesn't India control it?
I believe so.
Yeah, and it's like 10-mile radius.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a thing online that said a boat crashed there, and you can still see on Google Images the remnants of the boat.
Yeah, they came for the people in the boat too, and the helicopters got them off the boat right as the people were like pulling up in
so they lived.
rafts and shit. Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah, they lived, but the villagers were coming for them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you imagine stumbling across a village?
They've been fucked with sometime in the past. You know, that Commander Maurice Vidal Portman,
yeah.
that guy?
Yeah.
Shout out to
my homeboy just sent me a link to something. I'm about to see what this shit is real quick. Shootings in New York City rose 166% last month compared to August 2019. What is this? Written by Lauren Cook, September the 2nd, 2020. And this is from Pix, New York's very own. New York City shootings. City rose 160% compared to New Jersey, and community leaders continue to grapple with how to curb an alarming spike in gun violence this year. There were 242 shootings citywide in August, according to crime statistics released by the NYPD on Wednesday. In August 2019, there were 91 shootings. The number of homicides and burglaries last month also rose by double-digit percentages compared to August 2019. Homicides are up 47%, 53 in 2020, 36 in 2019, and burglaries increased 22%, 1,310 in 2020, and 1,076 in 2019. Despite all the continuing challenges, our NYPD officers are undaunted, Police Commissioner Dermot Shea said Wednesday in a statement. The work of our officers represents the best of the policing performances, and it continues as they increasingly engage with all of our community partners to protect life, preserve crime, prevent crime, and build safer neighborhoods. Mayor Bill de Blasio, speaking Wednesday morning during a coronavirus briefing, said the pandemic unleashed a perfect storm in the city. We know that with the entire society on hold for months, all sorts of things got set in motion that were truly unusual, de Blasio said. We do see signs of progress now that we are profound. I don't know, that don't even sound right. Anyway, the court system is starting to come back to life. That's going to help us immensely. The mayor also said that NYPD community leaders have been working closely together over the last few months to stem the surge of shootings. NYPD outlined several ways, and it's trying to mitigate the rise of violence. More officers have been shifted to areas experiencing upticks in shootings. Officers are working to collect intelligence and address crime and criminal conditions in real time. A combination of short and long-term investigation is being employed to root out persistent drivers of violence. Grassroots community outreach continues throughout neighborhood policing. Overall, crime in August 2020 rose by 7% compared to August 2019, only a slight increase because reported rapes are down 22%, and there was a 17% drop in grand larcenies, according to the NYPD data. Gun arrests also leveled out. But anyway, this is an article that a police officer sent me. One of my homies. And I get it. But at the same time, it's just like, Then he sent me another link. Mom mourns son who couldn't stay away from his old Bronx neighborhood and ended up dying in gunfire there. Okay, bro, I get it, yo. But at the same time, what I try to explain to him is why is this violence inherent in our culture? And it is because it has been bred and beat into us. That's why niggas act this way. Niggas act like niggas because the white man invented the nigga, or nigger. There was no nigger before America. We were all motherfucking kings, queens, royalty, and in some type of fucking natural society. But now they, over the 300 years of being in bondage, they created a personality type, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, you can't undo almost 400 years of brainwashing in 150 years. It don't even out. It will take longer than the amount of time you put into the brainwashing to undo the brainwashing. Brainwashed. Post-traumatic stress syndrome, bipolar, everything was beat the fuck into us for generation after generation after generation after generation. 15 fucking generations. "20 generations. How long? I mean, it's like, and how do you think this self-hate is supposed to dissipate in a century and a half? After this is the only way we've known shit. And even after the actual physical bondage, there's still massive brainwashing agendas and tactics going on in our everyday lives all the time. All of the time. And is it fucked up? It most certainly is. Is a lot of it our fault? It most certainly is. But are we the sole causal effect of the way that our culture functions? We are not. Time sucked. No, I haven't. In Philadelphia? No, I haven't.
Biker bag, wheelchair, gasoline, mashed potatoes.
Episode 5! Wow! We did it! Wowie. We said last week 4 might be it. Just JK. Joe Paisley.
Jan Cummins?
And if you guys are wondering why we refer to it as episode 5, because we don't even know what we're going to say, which is a scary way to live our life.
Yeah, I'm from Philly, bro. I know why they call it Philadelphia. And I grew up in a small town in South Carolina called Hartsville. But we had so many murders in that little town that we call that shit Killerville. So I'm from 2 killer towns. A big city, Philadelphia, and a small town, Killerville.
You notice how they're, the fun way that they're named? Yeah, we don't fucking know. We're gonna say. We don't know. So,
Get named after the fact.
Scary. Family is always on edge around us, but that's the way it is.
On this, Is We Dumb, I'm gonna, for video watchers, I'm gonna be stiff neck guy. I just came from the doctor. So just got a couple stitches in my neck. All good, all fine.
Came to the doctor,
Stiff neck guy.
he karate chopped your neck.
He karate chopped my neck.
It's a weird procedure. So new episodes of Is We Dumb every Wednesday at noon Pacific time. And the goal, as always, is to come out on the other side of this episode being a little less dumb than we were heading in.
Exactly.
We look at other examples of people being stupid, go, God, I don't want to do that. That's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the flip side, of course, of the sliver of hope, which is the good examples of humanity.
Yes.
You look at that and you go,
for.
I can be better.
Yes.
That's the goal. That's what we're doing here.
And I like the confessional part. I like having to think about the dumb things I've been doing and then shame myself each week.
Me too.
It is
It's a
humbling.
new fetish of mine.
It's
But it is good.
It's kind of cathartic too.
Yeah. Online, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at IsWeDumb. Continue to send in that segment content. We are loving it. It's so much fun to go through that, you guys. You send that to dumb@iswedumb.com, and we're talking about the Would You Rather ideas, dumb idiots, 1-star reviews. I mean, whatever it may be, send it in.
Yeah.
And then everything else, info@iswedumb.com. Find merch, badmagicmerch.com, iswedumb.com. And we do want to give one more big thank you to Pandora.
Yay!
Welcome to everybody skipping over from there to check us out, which is great.
Yes.
We love that. And a shout out to Spotify and our listeners over there, because we once again
Top 20 in the trending charts.
hit that trending chart. And that's thanks to you guys, clicking the little click.
This is the difference in any other most podcasts. And why I listen to so much Joe Rogan is
Manage your team's work easily with Monday.com. Just go to Monday.com and start tracking any
Respectable.
I mean, even though Joe Rogan's podcast is on the radio, it doesn't sound like he's on the radio. It sounds like he's fucking chilling with some homies, having a dope ass conversation. I listen to other podcasts and these guys sound like they're on the radio and they had to throw like their little advertisement in there real quick, and it's like, I don't know.
On Twitter, he has a giant thread about it. It may be pinned on the top of his Twitter page, but explaining like one of the reasons why those people are so hostile.
Right.
And it has to do with this British explorer who was really kinky, and
You went there to fuck.
yeah, who knows
He
what
wanted
he
fuck
did.
island?
Who knows what he did, but people got sick because of I had this guy Graham Hancock on, and he was talking to me about all the different shit that they're finding in the Amazon and in South America, and that there used to be 20.
Wow, I never thought about that. Is that the reason why the people from North Sentinel Island are so violent and vicious and murderous towards anybody, especially pale-skinned people who come close to them, because somebody actually made it to their island and they were nice enough to let these motherfuckers walk on their land and eat their food? And then he wants to come in there and fuck and rape all their people and spread diseases and shit. But they killed them motherfuckers off and vowed to their whole colony, we will never allow anyone else to come to this island ever again, yo. You tried it, y'all fucked shit up, y'all almost killed all my people off. Never and again ever. And they don't let people on that fucking island don't come close here, because we ain't want your stinky ass morals, your sinful ass ways, and your nasty ass diseases and shit y'all got. We pure humans over here. We never mix with anybody. We're pure humans. Keep all y'all motherfucking whack ass genetic impurities elsewhere.
People that live in the Amazon, and they died off because of sickness. They were visited mostly, apparently Europeans, when they came in like the 1500s, they would tell these incredible stories about these huge civilizations in the Amazon
But then when explorers came back 200 years later, there was nothing there. And they were like, this is crazy. They lied. They must have lied. But it turns out they didn't lie. What happened was smallpox ran through the fucking jungle and killed everybody.
We did it.
And then the jungle just overtook these cities, and now they're finding these cities with something called LiDAR. They use these planes, and they circle over this area, or helicopters, whatever the fuck they do, and they shoot this shit down, this LiDAR. It's like laser radar, and it gives you a detailed image of what's below the surface and what's there.
Shit.
And it shows them all these crazy structures, all these like roadways and irrigation systems and circles inside of a square. Like it was villages and cities, and millions of people probably lived there. And look at it. That's all the stuff they're finding now.
What?
Yeah, and all of it was swallowed up by the jungle. They think within like 100 years, it just vanished in the jungle.
Wow.
Because it's so lush and tropical down there. Dude, it was one of the most amazing podcasts I've ever done. To listening to that guy tell this story.
Right after this one, though.
No, you are the best. You're the best. But he's
This is kind of this is like the findings of Atlantis, right? Like when they started finding, you started finding more and more land underground.
Have you seen this? They found traces of 5 drugs, including dimethyltryptamine, on a 1,000-year-old South American ritual kit.
DMT, baby.
So that's like proof positive evidence that at least 1,000 years ago they were using ayahuasca.
Wow.
This was the drug pouch that was made from fox snouts. That sounds so crazy.
Fox nose.
It literally when you see it, it looks like a nose.
Oh, they used everything.
And the fur is still intact. It looks really nice.
The nose. I wonder why they do that with a fox. It's probably like some cleverness. Do you know that that's what a shaman, that's like literally what a shaman is supposed to, that's what the definition is supposed to be in certain cultures?
Huh.
Certain cultures, it's a clever fellow. That's who the shaman is.
Okay, it kind of makes sense. They are just clever fellows.
But I mean, imagine that. Like, he takes a fox, that clever little fucker. I'm going to take his face.
I want his
hide
fucking
my
face.
drugs in his face. Only a person would think to do something so
Hide my
creepy.
drugs in his
Or an
nose.
insect.
Chipmunk cheeks.
Yeah, right? That would be a good move. Yeah, a little pouch.
Those are good pouches.
That hangs from your belt. It's just chipmunk cheeks with all your coins in it.
What the fuck? Chipmunk cheek pouch.
You work hard, at home, on the job, and everywhere in between. So this Labor Day, Toyota pays tribute to all of America's hard-working communities with great savings to help make your next project your best project. Right now, get 0% APR on a sporty new Camry, or take $2,000 cash back. Or get a fuel-efficient Prius with 0% APR for 5 years. Let's work together this Labor Day and every day. Toyota. This isn't a fling. It's a commitment. You get out what you put in. So get to Advance. Right oil, right filter, right price. $33.99 every day. Advance your auto at Advance Auto Parts.
Here we go. And boom, we're live. Graham, great to see you again.
Nice to be back with you, Jeff.
And we were just talking about your new book, America Before That. There's 2 versions of it. There's one version, and then there's a newer version that's a Barnes & Noble version that's specific to Barnes & Noble
think I've
that
heard
has
this
an extra
before.
whole chapter in it.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they can get that at Barnes & Noble. I'm just trying to keep bookstores alive, man. They're on the way out.
I think it's really important, and that's one of the reasons that I did this, because I had finished the book, and then Barnes & Noble came to me through my publishers and said they would like to do a special edition of the book, but in order to do that, I needed to write them some extra material, and I had a lot of material that I hadn't put in the book, and I thought, well, this is an opportunity to put that out there.
Beautiful. So if people want that, it's a little bit different, and there's a small gold square.
Okay, so first of all, my website, grahamhancock.com, has a page about America Before, and the link to the Barnes & Noble edition is there, as well as the link to the standard edition, which is on Amazon and iTunes and all kinds of other places. So GrahamHancock.com and the America Before page, the link to the Barnes & Noble edition is right there.
All right, there it is. So, how is this? Before we even get into the book, what is it?
Go to Talks and Events.
Okay, we're on the Graham Hancock website.
No, go to books. Go to books. Go to America Before.
Bam.
Bam.
There it is.
Go to United States, you can see Amazon, Barnes, and there's Barnes & Noble.
Special edition.
Special edition. Click on that.
There you go. And then the ebook as well.
The ebook is available. The audio book, which I read myself, is available there. Then if you scroll down, oops, that shouldn't be there.
It's damn pop-ups.
Damn
Sons of bitches. I am so happy you read it yourself. I get angry when someone else reads someone who I'm like, come on, he can talk.
Yeah, I enjoy reading my books myself, and what I've learned from feedback I get from audiences at presentations is people like me doing that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It's just weird when someone else is talking in your voice. Like, hey man, I know you're not Graham.
You know that I write fiction as well as
Yes.
non-fiction.
Yeah.
And the one thing I can't read is my fiction.
Really?
Well, yeah, because fiction requires accents. You really need an actor
Yes.
to read a fiction book who can get into the different characters. But for a non-fiction book like America Before, it's very straightforward for me just to read it myself.
I agree. I'm a tremendous Stephen King fan, but when I read Stephen King's books where he reads them or listen to them when he reads them, they're terrible. He's awful at it.
I don't think a novelist should read their own novels. I think that's a job for an actor. Oddly enough, I've just been reading Stephen King's Dark Tower series. Very near the end of the 7th volume of that.
Yeah, I'm just a giant fan of his, but
Me
man,
too.
when he reads it like he's just reading it.
Yeah.
It's like, oof, this is rough. It's hard to get behind. Anyway, America Before.
So there's
give us
on the website. There's details about the book. There's a page where there are links to the book, and also the other thing I would like to take this opportunity to mention is I'm in America and Canada for the next 7 weeks, and I'm going to be doing something like 25 presentations in something like 20 American cities, and then 3 Canadian cities in Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. And that's all on the Talks and Events page of my website. So if anybody wants to come along and meet this old man in person, I'll be doing those events.
And are you doing these at theaters, and do you allow Q&As? Like how
Absolutely, I allow Q&As. I encourage that. I feel as an author that, frankly speaking, I'm nothing without my audience. I owe my audience, my readers, big time. And what I try to do at events is to give back as much as I can. So if people want to take pictures with me, I am absolutely up for that. I don't understand why anybody would want to do that, but it's fun. It's kind of fun. And when people want to come to the desk where I'm signing and ask me personal questions, I'm ready to do that. Sometimes on the British book tour, which I just finished, I was behind in the event space for 4 hours after the event finished.
Wow.
Signing and taking pictures. But it's a joy. It's a really opportunity for me to interact with the people who actually make my work matter. So
that's fantastic. Beautiful. So what inspired this? I know there's always been, first of all, we should just say for people who don't know, you have been at the front of the line for decades, talking about these lost civilizations. And from reading your work, I mean, I think I first read your work in the 90s. You exposed me to a lot of these, what were at the time controversial ideas that have now been substantiated by actual evidence, particularly Göbekli Tepe and I mean the all the water erosion stuff on the Sphinx, and I've since had Dr. Robert Schoch on the podcast to talk about that as well. But all this stuff was at one point very controversial, and now far less.
Yes.
I mean, whatever traditional academics and traditional historians that are trying to, I guess it's archaeologists, that were trying to resist, they've let go a lot of that. They've had to with things like Göbekli Tepe.
They've had to because the evidence has overwhelmed them. And Göbekli Tepe is an excellent example. Prior to the discovery and excavation of Göbekli Tepe, which is a site in Anatolia in Turkey, it was the view, very firm view of archaeologists, that there had been no megalithic architecture anywhere on Earth. And when I say megalithic, I mean literally big stones, stone circles, huge constructions, nothing like that before at the very, very earliest 6,000 years ago. And they would point to sites in, for example, Malta, a site called Gigantia, which is about 5,800 years old. That's the oldest megalithic architecture in the world. And they could understand how that was because these were agricultural societies. They generated surpluses. You could free up people who could become specialists in architecture, in astronomy, in geometry, and they could apply their skills to
I got some weird text messages going on right now.
What they never considered possible was that a society that was hunter-gatherers would have created a gigantic megalithic site, and then suddenly Göbekli Tepe is discovered. It dates to 11,600 years ago. It's more than 5,000 years older than the supposedly oldest megalithic architecture in the world. And it is in the center where there had been no previous evidence of agriculture. But the moment Göbekli Tepe appears, agriculture appears as well. And this is just something that's really hard for archaeology to explain. They've suddenly got 5,000 years of missing history that they've just never taken into account. And what I see them doing is largely avoiding the problem rather than getting to grips with it directly. And in fact, there have been a great number of changes in the last 20 years, which have worked generally in favor of the arguments that I've proposed.
Well, I'm so happy for you because I know that for a long time you were out there on your own with a lot of these theories.
Very, very much so, and also subjected to the most blistering and deeply unpleasant criticism from the archaeological fraternity and from their friends in the media, like how dare this journalist propose that history might be different or that we might have a forgotten chapter in the human story. It was regarded almost as offensive that I would put this material out there, and archaeologists felt it was their responsibility to show the public that I was full of shit, and that was the whole way my work was greeted, and to a certain extent still is greeted by archaeologists, but things have changed. Central to my work was the notion of a global cataclysm, roughly 12,500, 12,800 years ago. It made sense to me in 1995 when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, but there was no compelling evidence for a global cataclysm then. All the evidence seemed to point to that time and a massive global event. And then from 2007 onwards, more than a decade after I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, we get a group of more than 60 major scientists who are seriously proposing that the Earth was hit by multiple fragments of a giant comet 12,800 years ago, and that this caused a huge rise in sea level and extinctions of megafaunas. They are not saying that it also wiped out a lost advanced civilization of prehistory. I'm saying that.
Yes.
But what has changed is that we now have compelling, hard scientific evidence. I'm not saying every scientist accepts it. It's the nature of science to dispute findings. But we have a group of 60 major figures who have seriously proposed this in all the leading mainstream journals. And it's changed the balance of power in this argument, because one thing that they used to say is Hancock can't be right because there was no global cataclysm 12 or 13,000 years ago. Well, now we know there was, and there are various explanations for it. So that's moved things along. And the other thing that's changed a lot is the attitude of the man in the street to authority. That has changed. Back in the 90s, authority figures were the gatekeepers. They controlled everything. If an authority figure in a discipline like archaeology said Hancock is completely wrong, he's made all this stuff up, that would generally be believed, not by everybody, but by the majority of people. Today, to have a mainstream authority figure say that to me is actually an advantage, because people are so distrustful of authority, and rightly so, because we've been lied to by authority figures in all fields for so long. The bullshit has been so enormous that people are finally waking up. We can't trust what authority figures say.
And I think we can thank the internet for that.
We can thank the internet for that, yeah.
I'm sure you've seen the more recent evidence of a crater that they just discovered, like fairly recently.
Greenland.
Yes, enormous.
It's an enormous crater. It's 18 miles wide. It had not been discovered before because it's under ice. It's under a lot of ice. At the end of the Ice Age, Greenland was one area which never lost its ice cover completely, whereas North America, everywhere north of Minnesota, was covered in ice a mile, sometimes 2 miles deep. Europe, the same, Northern Europe. But Greenland kept its ice, whereas the other parts of the world lost their ice at the end of the Ice Age. And what's interesting about Greenland is there's already evidence of comet impact in Greenland, which goes back to papers published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2013, that they found what are called impact proxies in Greenland. In other words, nanodiamonds, carbon spherules, and evidence of a lot of platinum and iron was found in a layer in the ice dated to 12,800 years ago. But the next development, and you're absolutely right, and this was just a few months ago, was the discovery of this humongous crater in Greenland, and evidence that it was caused by an iron impactor of some kind. Now, dating of it, I would be irresponsible to say that that crater definitely dates to 12,800 years ago, because the work has not been done to prove that yet. But what I can say, and what the specialists who have explored and excavated the crater are saying, is that it's recent. They can say for sure that it happened during the last ice age. Under the crater is nothing but massively disturbed and destroyed and completely wrecked ice from the ice age, from the Pleistocene. Above it is smooth, perfect ice from our epoch, which is called the Holocene, which began about 11,600 years ago. So all the evidence suggests that this crater dates to that period between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, but to absolutely confirm that, more work needs to be done. But it's part of a growing pattern. The Younger Dryas impact scientists, they call themselves, they call this the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, and it's because there was a period in the Earth's geological history that geologists call the Younger Dryas, which lasted for 1,200 years, from 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. It's a very mysterious period. We see all the megafauna dying off suddenly and rapidly. We see rises in sea level. We see a huge collapse in global temperature. It's a cataclysmic epoch, and what is becoming clearer and clearer is that the evidence that a comet was behind it is extremely strong. And as more and more evidence comes in, we realize how widespread it was. So they found evidence of the impacts as far south as Antarctica now. Previously they were focused very much on North America, now as far south as Antarctica, as far east as Syria. This was truly a global event, and it changed the world. And I think, and it's my case, that it wiped our memory of a previous episode of human civilization, that right at the epicenter of this cataclysm was a civilization that we would regard as advanced, not a simple hunter-gatherer civilization, which was utterly wiped out in this cataclysmic event.
And I should say, for anyone who's really fascinated right now, please maybe pause and go listen to the two that you did with Randall Carlson, yes, where it really goes into depth about the impact, the evidence of these impacts, yes, the evidence of the very quick demise of the Ice Age, and what may have resulted in all these floods that you read about in the Epic of Gilgamesh, that you read about in Noah's Ark, and that all these things are probably tales of stories that people pass down from generation to generation that survived this time.
Yeah, because we now know that at that time, between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, truly global cataclysmic events involving rapid rises in sea level did occur, and suddenly the worldwide tradition of a global flood stops being just a myth and starts being a memory, an account of real events. It's been my privilege to work very closely with Randall Carlson.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Randall is absolutely amazing. He is a total genius. He's also a gentle giant and such a kind, generous, spirited person. It's a joy to work with him, and every minute spent with him is an education. I had the privilege of traveling across the Channel Scablands in Washington State with Randall, and seeing things through his eyes really opened my eyes to the scale of this disaster. You know, you can look at these giant boulders called glacial erratics, and they just look odd sitting there in the landscape, but when you really consider how they got there, that they got there in icebergs the size of oil tankers, that were carried on floods that were at least 500 up to 1,000 feet deep, that were tearing through the channeled scablands, literally ripping the landscape apart. Then the icebergs would ground on valley sides, the flood waters would recede, the icebergs would be left, they're giant icebergs, and as they melted away, they revealed the rocks that they had enchained that were caught up within them, and they're scattered all over the landscape. And you look at that and you think, anything that was underneath that 12,800 years ago is gone completely. There can't be anything left of it at all. Utterly, utterly destroyed.
And I would encourage people that are interested in this to please watch the YouTube videos of it, because Randall provides all sorts of video and photographic evidence where you can take a look at the landscape and you get a perspective of how immense this destruction was.
Yeah, it's really important to see that, because it's easy enough to talk about floods and cataclysms, but actually to see its effect on the landscape directly it has an emotional impact. I felt emotional traveling across the Channel Scablands, realizing that this was the heart of an event that changed the world completely. And the evidence continues to build. I have, in America before, I've not gone over old ground that I went over in Magicians of the Gods that we covered in the various interviews and podcasts, and which is really a good idea that people take a look at. But what I have done is added the new information published since 2015, which further supports the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and the notion that multiple fragments of a giant comet hit the Earth and created an absolute global catastrophe.
So what was the motivation behind creating this book, America Before?
It's a curious mixture of things. I have been exploring the possibility of a lost civilization for more than 25 years. That was the essence of my book, Fingerprints of the Gods, that was published in 1995, that there has been a huge forgotten episode in human history. I continued to follow that in a series of other books, and by the time I got to 2002, when I published a book called Underworld, that followed 7 years of scuba diving on continental shelves, looking for structures that were submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, I really felt I'd done it. I felt I'd walked the walk. I'd put out to the public a massive body of information, and I thought my role in this is over, and I can breathe a sigh of relief because it's hot in this particular kitchen, and I can go do something else. And I ended up writing a book about psychedelics. I ended up writing Supernatural, Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind, about the role of psychedelics in the origins of the human story. But then new information started to come out that touched on the lost civilization idea, and I couldn't just stand by and ignore that information. That's why I published Magicians of the Gods in 2015. And then, as I was researching that book, I became aware of something I hadn't realized before, that there's a mass of new information from the Americas, specifically from the Americas, which completely rewrites the story of human history, that the Americas have been misrepresented for a very long time by archaeology, and archaeologists will be annoyed with me for saying that. They have a way of forgetting their own errors, of saying, oh, well, we knew that all along. It wasn't the case. But the fact of the matter remains that for the best part of 50 years, from the 1960s through until about 2010, American archaeology was locked in a dogma that they actually had a name for, which was Clovis first. That they invented a name for a culture. They called them the Clovis culture. We don't know what they called themselves. They were hunter-gatherers. They first appear in the archaeological record 13,400 years ago, and they vanish from the archaeological record 12,600 years ago. And for a very long time, it was maintained adamantly that these were the first Americans, that no human being touched the soil of the Americas until 13,400 years ago. Just animals, but no human beings present at all. And any archaeologist who attempted to dispute that dogma, and I use the word deliberately, there should be no room for dogma in science, but any archaeologist who challenged that would face severe problems with his or her career. They would be mocked and humiliated at conferences, like an archaeologist called Jacques Cinq-Mars from Canada, who excavated in the Yukon. Humiliated at conferences, insulted, accused of making stuff up. Their research funding would be withdrawn. Basically, to challenge Clovis first was the end of your archaeological career. So naturally, very few archaeologists wanted to challenge Clovis first.
What was this gentleman in the Yukon? What was his?
He's called Jacques Cinq-Mars. And interestingly, the Smithsonian, just in 2017, did a big kind of mea culpa, a big admission about this, that everybody had got things wrong, that Jacques Cinq-Mars had been ruined by the Clovis first lobby, that he'd been right all along. The site he excavated in the Yukon was re-excavated in 2017, and every single thing he said was correct, even though they had just sneered at him.
In what year was he?
He was excavating in the 1980s and the 1990s.
Is he still alive?
He's still alive. He's still alive. Yeah.
Is he better?
Well, I think he's vindicated, you know, and it's kind of nice to be vindicated.
Yes.
That there's almost a place in folklore for the individual who is scorned and humiliated, you know, by others, but who turns out to be right, and he was right. But my point about this is that what it meant was, since it was the dogma that Clovis was first, that the oldest dates were 13,400 years ago, there seemed to be no logic to archaeologists in digging deeper. You know how it is with archaeology, that the upper levels are the youngest, and the deeper you go, the older it gets. That's why we say Upper Paleolithic for the late Ice Age, and for the late Stone Age, and lower for the older Stone Age, below the Clovis layer, because we already know that there were no human beings there before that. And then a few archaeologists, I mentioned Jacques Cinq-Mars, but another is Al Goodyear from the University of South Carolina, who excavated a site called Topper in South Carolina. Now, Topper is an incredibly rich Clovis site. It's full of their tools, their points. They made these special flint points that were used as arrowheads and spears. A great Clovis site. He finished excavating the Clovis level, and then he did something that was supposed not to be done. He decided to dig deeper, and he carried on digging down, and there was a layer of about 1.5 meters of barren soil, and then beneath that, more human artifacts. And they finally date those back to more than 50,000 years ago. And then in 2017, published in Nature, by Tom Demeray, who's the chief paleontologist at the San Diego Natural History Museum, and a bunch of other very high-level paleontologists, published in Nature magazine, evidence for human presence in North America 130,000 years ago. Now, this has really put the cat amongst the pigeons. Now, if humans were present in North America 130,000 years ago, and archaeologists have been telling us for 50 years that they were only present from 13,000 years ago, that's 10 times as long that we've had humans in North America capable of doing stuff, and the archaeological dogma has prevented any search for what they were doing until very recently.
What was the evidence from 130,000 years ago?
Okay, so it's not the, let me be clear about this, because this is something that is often misrepresented in my views. It is not the evidence for an advanced civilization that we find 130,000 years ago in America. The evidence that we find is evidence for human presence. And what they were doing was very much Stone Age stuff. It's a mastodon. It's a mastodon skeleton that was excavated. It was actually found by accident during road construction near San Diego. An archaeologist was attached to the road construction crew and immediately stopped construction, and they investigated it thoroughly. And what they found was so much dynamite in the early 1990s when they found it that they decided not to publish at the time. Because what they found was evidence that those mastodon bones had been cracked open by human beings using tools, and that the marrow had been extracted, that one tusk had been left standing upright in the ground and another had been left beside it, that a femur of the animal had been taken away completely from the site. And there was assemblages of instruments that were used to smash and break the bones. And the conclusion of the team was that only one kind of creature could have done that work using tools on a mastodon, and that's human beings. That's classic human behavior. So this sets the goalposts in a totally different place. Suddenly we have to consider that humans have been in America for 130,000 years. We already know that a dogmatic approach of archaeology has rather refused to look at anything older than 13,000 years ago. And what it does is it generates an engine of demand that we need to be looking at those missing 100,000 plus years. We need to be looking at it hard. Of course, the immediate reaction has not been to go looking for stuff in the other 100,000 years. Most archaeologists have responded by saying this is impossible. It can't be so. But that's precisely what they said to Jacques Cinq-Mars, who said that humans were in Bluefish Caves in the Yukon 25,000 years ago. And it's precisely what they said to Al Goodyear, who said humans had been at Topper 50,000 years ago. And they were both right. And I believe that Tom Demeray and his team, you don't get a big article published in Nature unless it's already pretty solidly based and pretty much peer reviews. It has produced a reaction. I would be wrong to say that it's universally accepted. It's very much challenged, but it's intriguing.
What is the challenge?
The challenge fundamentally comes from we archaeologists know that there were no human beings in the Americas that far back. To put it in perspective, it's about 60,000 years before the first evidence of human beings in Europe. It's about 60,000 years before the first evidence of human beings in Australia.
And this is just evidence of the first human beings.
Yes.
We have to point out how difficult it is to find evidence.
It's extremely difficult to find. You know, sometimes we imagine that archaeologists are working with masses of skeletal material. No, they're not. They're not. I mean, this is one of the ironies. The whole Clovis first dogma, you would think that they had masses of material to work with. They did have the tools, but in terms of skeletal remains, just one. Just one single skeletal remain from
Now,
that period.
one of the things that Michael Shermer had sent me was this dispute that perhaps the bones had been cracked open by the excavation material.
Yeah,
by the excavation machines.
I saw Michael's email last night, and I appreciate that Michael wants to continue to engage with this subject, and that's his job. He's a professional skeptic, and it's his role to do so. But what he misses out, it's true that a new paper has been published, which raises questions over the what's called the Cerruti Mastodon site, which is the site that Tom Desmarais at San Diego Natural History Museum excavated. And what's interesting, since Michael took the trouble to write the questions, can I just read you something that I responded to of this?
Sure.
Which is that
do it to the microphone.
Yeah. Basically, this paper was in no way a refutation of the original paper in Nature. As a matter of fact, the gentleman who wrote that paper never even looked at the archaeological remains that are now in the San Diego Natural History Museum. What he based it on is reference, I'm quoting from the abstract of the paper itself, reference to a freeway right-of-way map and construction plans, contemporary road building practices, and worksite photographs available on the internet. In other words, the site was not visited. They simply looked at secondary references. They did not look at the archaeological material, and they ignored the entire argument of Tom Desmarais and his colleagues, who had already addressed that issue.
They didn't look at the bones?
They did not look at the bones. When you break a fresh bone, it has a characteristic kind of spiral fracture that does not happen when you break a fossilized bone. And Tom Desmarais and his team specifically ruled out road-making machinery as responsible for this breaking pattern, because they actually carried out experiments on modern elephants, deceased elephants, and they broke their bones. And the kind of fracture that you get in a fresh green bone is completely different from the kind of fracture you get in a fossilized bone. So unfortunately, this paper pays no attention to that. It just looks at road plans and says there was road work there, it must have been done by road work. I think it's very sloppy, very weak, and it's certainly not the answer. We can expect ongoing debate, and that is healthy, but this is not a strong case at all.
So this points to the first evidence that we found. And is there any effort underway to try to uncover more evidence that from a similar time
period?
Well,
I'm going to cite Tom Desmarais, the chief paleontologist at the San Diego Natural History Museum. That's what he would like to see. He makes the point to me. I interview him. I spent a day with him at the Natural History Museum. He was very generous with his time. I did an extended interview, and I quote from it in America before. And his wish is that archaeologists, instead of spending all their time trying to find ways to dismiss and get rid of his findings, his wish is that they would spend a little bit of that time looking at deposits older than 13,400 years, and even being willing to go back as far as 130,000 years. That's would be a proper scientific response. Here is a thorough body of work put forward by a very senior group of scientists who hesitated before they published it. They had the information back in the 1990s, but it wasn't until refined dating techniques later than in the 21st century that they finally were sure what they had, and that they published it in Nature in 2017. It's an important study, and I think what's going to happen is that we're going to find much more evidence of a very ancient human presence in the Americas, and that's what Tom Desmarais thinks as well. And as he points out, if we don't look, then we're never going to find. If we allow dogma to stop us looking and saying, oh, it's impossible that humans were in the Americas 130,000 years ago, so we won't bother to look. What a failure of science that is. And to spend all the time instead trying to get rid of the evidence that doesn't fit the current paradigm.
But it's so fascinating that just this fortuitous discovery during a construction site could change the way people perceive things. And you've got to wonder how much of that stuff is how deep did they have to go to find these mastodon bones?
Well, so this is a road cut that's being made. So those would be pretty deep down, 10, 15 feet down. The grader is going through and flattening them. It varies from place to place depending on soil deposition, the stratification of the soil. But what the key point is that what you need to do is go deeper than 13,400 years ago, and you need to do so with dedication and vigor and with some kind of funding. And at the moment, archaeology doesn't see the point of that. If the paper in Nature by Tom Demeray was alone, if there were nothing else than that, I wouldn't place so much trust in it. But I've spent a lot of time during the researching of this book with archaeologists who did dig deeper. And what those archaeologists all confirm is that there have been human beings in the Americas for tens of thousands of years. And it's not surprising that that can be pushed back to 130,000 years ago, because part of the argument about the peopling of the Americas has to do with a place that we now call the Bering Straits, between Alaska and Siberia, which during the Ice Age were at times a land bridge. They were exposed because of lowered sea levels. But migrants who crossed that land bridge from Siberia on many occasions over periods of tens of thousands of years would find themselves confronted then by the North American ice cap, which oddly wasn't at the tip of Alaska but began further in. So there was living space in a bit of Alaska, but you couldn't get through the ice mountains. These literally ice mountains, 2 miles deep, covering the whole of North America and preventing access to the unglaciated parts of America. The thing is that what happened around 13,400 years ago, there had been a period of global warming, and the ice sheets began to melt, and a corridor opened up between what's called the Cordilleran ice sheet and the Laurentide ice sheet, the two major ice caps in North America. And it's thought that the migration came through that corridor. Well, the thing is that exactly the same thing happened between 140,000 years ago and 120,000 years ago. There was an episode of global warming, an ice-free corridor opened up, and the same opportunity to enter the Americas was there at that period than it was at the later period. And Tom Demeray's point and mine is that we have to pay much more attention to that earlier period. And that's really why I've gone ahead and written this book, is to try to put before a broad general audience, hopefully in language that makes sense, an assembly of all the latest information that casts doubt on the story we've been told. Because my goodness, if archaeology is wrong about the story of the peopling of the Americas, if it's radically wrong, as it now appears to be, then our whole understanding of human history has to change. It's not just the history of the Americas, it's the history of the entire world. It has been an absolute article of faith amongst archaeologists that civilization began in the old world. And indeed, I have a book in my library called History Begins at Sumer, and it's by Samuel Noah Kramer, a very renowned archaeologist. And it's a good book, actually. But the argument is that this is where civilization began, in the culture that we call the Sumerians in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, and that it began about 6,000 years ago, and that civilization is entirely an invention of the old world and has nothing to do with the new world at all, because the new world was populated so late. This has been the argument, and this is the argument that now radically and suddenly begins to change, that the Americas, this enormous landmass, resource-rich, bountiful in every way, south of Minnesota, south of the ice cap, vast land areas that are bountiful. Get into South America, Central America, South America, the Amazon, just huge areas of land that were very, very offered great potential for human occupation. Dogma has said there were no humans there. Now the first bits of evidence are coming out that says there were humans there. And if that's the case, then we must consider the possibility that the story of civilization might have begun in the Americas, not in the old world at all. It might be a new world invention, not an old world invention.
Some of the more fascinating pieces of evidence in South America have come out recently about these channels and pathways that they've found in the Amazon that could not have been created any other way but by humans. Absolutely. Creating irrigation, humans creating, like, it appears like grids, like a city grid.
Definitely. The Amazon is a colossal mystery, and it's one of the subjects that I explore in depth in America before. First of all, to give some basic figures, the Amazon basin is huge. The Amazon basin is 7 million square kilometers in area. And within it, 5.5 million square kilometers remains almost entirely unstudied by archaeologists. And that's the 5.5 million square kilometers that is still covered by dense rainforest. And to put that into perspective, 5.5 million square kilometers is the size of the entire Indian subcontinent. So it's like saying, we've done world archaeology, but we've just ignored India. You know, We've done world archaeology, but we've just ignored the Amazon. It's the same argument. 5.5 million square kilometers. The view was, again, there was a dogma. There was a preconception. Human beings couldn't have flourished in the Amazon. It's not a resource-rich area. The soils are poor. It's a difficult area, challenging to get to, very far from the Bering Straits. So the view was that humans hadn't entered the Amazon until about 1,000 years ago. And then gradually, little by little, that view has begun to change. And it's begun to change because of the tragic clearances of the Amazon. Because the Amazon rainforest is literally being cut down and turned into soybean farms and cattle ranches. And in that cutting down process has emerged things that shouldn't be there at all. For example, evidence that large cities flourished in the Amazon. Enormous cities, which were larger than there was a Spanish explorer who went down the Amazon River system in 1541 to 1542. He was the first European to cross the entire length of South America from west to east along the Amazon. He reported seeing incredible cities, advanced arts and crafts, millions of people, a thriving culture. And 100 years later, when other Europeans got into the Amazon, they couldn't find these cities. So they said, oh, Francisco Orellana, that was his name, made it all up. It was just a fantasy. And then in the last decade, as the clearances of the Amazon have proceeded, we've begun to see the traces of those cities. What happened was that the Spaniards brought smallpox into the Amazon. Smallpox devastated the local population because there was no immunity to it. There was a massive die-off. The cities were deserted. Within 50 years, they were completely overgrown by the jungle, and that's why they were not seen by the explorers who came in 100 years later. But now the jungle's being cleared, those cities are emerging, and we can say that a city like London, which had a population of roughly 50,000 in the 16th century, there were cities of that size all over the Amazon. Wow. Huge numbers of them. And a possible total population of the Amazon that exceeded 20 million people.
What?
Yes, 20 million. This is the latest evidence from the Amazon. And then you ask yourself, how did they do that? How did they feed 20 million people in the Amazon? Because it's a fact, rainforest soils are poor. It's one of the reasons these soybean farms are a really stupid idea, because once you clear the rainforest, the land is largely unfertile and you can't grow stuff on it for very long. So how did they feed all these people? The answer was they invented a soil. And that soil has a name. It's called terra preta. Archaeologists refer to it as Amazonian dark earths or Amazonian black earth. It's a man-made soil. It's thousands of years old. It's full of microbes that are not found in adjoining soil. It's based around biochar. And you can take a handful of 8,000-year-old terra preta and you can add it to barren soil, and that soil will instantly become fertile. It's highly sought after in the Amazon, and it explains how they fed these people. There was science in the Amazon.
How did they create this?
Well, this is something that's not understood. It's still not understood by soil experts to this day as to how that was done, but it's one of many intriguing pieces of evidence of much higher development in the Amazon that it has been given credit for, and of a kind of science in the Amazon.
Jamie's got an image of it up there. So this is it?
This is terra preta.
Wow.
Exactly.
And so was that done by burns? Did they use controlled burns?
They did. One way that it was achieved was to do wet burning of middens. They would be burned and smolder. They wouldn't burn fiercely, which just produces charcoal. They would burn and smolder, and that what is called biochar would result, and that's part of the fertility of the soil. But the mystery is the microbial content of this soil, which is completely different from the microbes in neighboring soils, and that remains unexplained.
So, what are the theories? Composting, some sort of advanced composting?
Yes, some sort of advanced composting. But again, what has not been explained is the microbial content of these soils. So there first of all is an issue of how two things: how large populations get fed in the Amazon, and evidence that there was a culture in the Amazon that was capable of manipulating the environment in such a way that it could support large populations with the invention of terra preta. Secondly, new evidence previously not recognized: the Amazon is basically a garden. The Amazon is a man-made rainforest. There are certain trees like Brazil nut trees or the ice cream bean tree, which are food crops, which are very, very valuable, and they dominate the tree regime in the Amazon. They're what's referred to as hyperdominant species. In other words, people living in the Amazon over thousands of years selected certain trees, which they then cultivated and grew. So the whole thing is not simply a wild, pristine rainforest. It's a very ancient man-made environment. And emerging from that man-made environment, as well as evidence of large cities, large populations, and this mysterious dark earth, are huge geometrical structures. And again, I go into this at length in America before because I love this mystery. We have in the UK structures that are called henges. I live in the city of Bath, and about 30 miles away there's a beautiful site called Avebury, and another more famous site called Stonehenge. And what a henge is a ditch which has been dug deep, and then an embankment has been pushed up outside the ditch. When people first saw these structures, they wondered if they'd been built for defense. But then it became obvious they hadn't been built for defense, because if you want to create a moat, you put it outside your embankment, not inside your embankment. So a henge is an earthwork which consists of a deep moat with a large embankment outside it. It can be circular, it can be square, and in the UK and other parts of Europe it often contains stone circles, megalithic stone circles as well, but the henge itself is entirely an earthwork. What we find in the Amazon are thousands of henges that are now beginning to emerge from the cleared area of the jungle, and others that have been identified for the first time with LiDAR. LiDAR technology is being employed in the Amazon. It's non-destructive. You can see what's under the trees.
What is LiDAR?
Light imaging and detective radar. They bounce laser beams down into the jungle. There's a whole pattern of them. You need helicopters, and but it doesn't damage the rainforest. And you can strip away and see what's there. If this isn't too much of a diversion, let me give you the example of Guatemala. Guatemala is a small country, if I remember correctly. It's not much more than 100,000 square kilometers in size. It is filled with intriguing Mayan ruins. Everybody has heard of Tikal. What archaeologists didn't know was that literally within walking distance of Tikal, surrounding that whole area, were more than 60,000 structures that they hadn't identified. And these have all been identified by LiDAR in a country that's just 100,000 kilometers in area. So you have to ask yourself, in that 5.5 million square kilometers of the Amazon, if LiDAR technology could be applied comprehensively, what would we find beneath there? And the evidence already is extremely tempting and extremely tantalizing. And I'm these huge geometrical figures, which involve primarily circles and squares. And they are classic henges in the sense that they are deep ditches surrounded by huge embankments. They're extremely geometrical. For example, you can find an octagon surrounding a square. At a place called Jacosá in the Amazon, you can find a square perfectly enclosing a circle. Now that is an exercise called squaring the circle that our academics have given to the Greeks. They said the Greeks were the first people who performed that exercise. But now we find in dated sites in the Amazon that this was being done in the Amazon long before the Greeks.
What are the dates?
The earliest dates that have been found in these sites now are about 3,500 years old. About 3,500 years old. But the evidence is that the sites have been constantly remade. And what intrigues me is what remains in that 5.5 million square kilometers that has not been investigated yet. We are just, I think, looking at the edges of a mystery. The archaeologists involved, who are mainly from Finland and also from Brazil, feel the same. Their estimate is that there are thousands of these structures remaining in the jungle, and they're open as to how old they may ultimately prove to be. The investigation needs to be done, but what's fascinating about them is this very powerful geometry and astronomy. So a number of the sites are perfectly aligned to true north, true south, true east, and true west. I'm not talking about magnetic north, I'm talking about true astronomical north. To do that, there's only one way to do it, and that's with astronomy. So that tells us that astronomers were at work in the Amazon. The geometry is very complex and very precise. That tells us that people with geometrical skills were at work in the Amazon. And thirdly, the scale of the sites of hundreds of meters, gigantic earthworks on the scale of hundreds of meters, tells us that this was highly organized project that was undertaken on a very large scale by very large numbers of people. It's a wonderful mystery, and it deserves much further attention. And yeah, that's Jacosá, exactly. The squares, squaring the circle. So you can see the outside embankment, and then inside it is the square ditch, And then there's another embankment inside that, and a circle inside that.
It's crazy that they made a road right through that. What
well, a modern road, yeah, you know, because there's no respect for the ancient world, unfortunately.
And there's another one. Look at that! Wow, that's incredible.
So
how they found the stuff that they found in the Amazon? What imaging technology were they using to find all this?
Initially, it was entirely found because areas of the rainforest had been cleared. Economic interests said, we want to make a cattle ranch here, or we want to make a soya bean farm here, so we're just going to clear the rainforest. In the process of clearing the rainforest, they start discovering these earthworks that had previously been completely overgrown by the jungle. Then the next step was to say, what can we do to find out more about this? Obviously, they don't want to destroy more jungle, and luckily we have a technology which is LiDAR, as I mentioned, which uses radar. And using LiDAR, they've been able to identify many more of these sites, and then to get to the sites without destroying the jungle, and to begin excavations on them, and to find that they go back, in the cases of the ones that have been explored so far, at least 3,000 years. This is an intriguing development, completely unexplained in our understanding of the Amazon. And what it suggests is a heritage of extremely ancient knowledge. You don't wake up one morning and create a perfectly geometrical square or circular earthwork that's perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west on an enormous scale. There has to be a background to that. There has to be a reason for doing it. And the evidence is none of these sites were lived in. There's no habitation refuse found in them whatsoever. We don't know what they were used for. I make the case in America before that they're connected to a system of ideas which is found all around the world, which is to do with death and the afterlife destiny of the soul. And I go into the issue of ayahuasca in this book because, first of all, ayahuasca is itself another example of Amazonian science. As you and I and many of the listeners and viewers know, the active ingredient of ayahuasca is DMT, dimethyltryptamine. But dimethyltryptamine is not normally accessible through the gut. We have to smoke it or vape it to get that rocket ship to the other side of reality. And the journey lasts, 10, 12 minutes, not much more than that, and sometimes quite a lot less. What ayahuasca does is it makes DMT available through the gut. The reason it's not available through the gut is because of an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase, and that switches off DMT on contact. The ayahuasca vine, which is one of the two ingredients of the ayahuasca brew, the other ingredient is leaves that contain DMT. The ayahuasca vine contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which switches off the enzyme in the gut and allows the DMT to be accessed orally, which produces a rather different journey from the smoked or vaped DMT trip. It's a much longer journey. It's 4 or 5 hours. It allows you to integrate and to interrelate with the strange landscapes in which you find yourself amongst and the entities that you encounter. I'm not making any claims about the reality status of those entities, but what I am saying, and it's a fact, is that people who work with DMT and ayahuasca do encounter what they construe to be entities who communicate with them intelligently. So somebody in the Amazon, out of 150,000 different species of plants and trees, selected 2 that are not psychoactive on their own, but when put together, create an extraordinary visionary brew. And ayahuasca means the vine of the dead. And what it's connected to in South American religious and spiritual thinking is what happens to us when we die. The Tucano, who are an Amazonian people who work regularly with ayahuasca, I mean, the Tucano actually will give a teaspoonful of ayahuasca to a newborn infant. They feel ayahuasca is so important that there's a hidden realm around us which we are not normally aware of, and we need to be aware of it, and ayahuasca is an important part of that. In their ayahuasca journeys, the Tucano shamans experience visions, and they will then come back to an alert, normal, problem-solving state of consciousness, and they will paint and depict their visions. And what's intriguing, and I go into it in the book, is that quite a number of the Tucano paintings of the other world, of the afterlife realm, of the entrance to the other world, are geometrical, and they look exactly like the geoglyphs. So I'm beginning to wonder whether these geoglyphs were part of a system of spiritual ideas concerning what happens to us after death and what we need to do in this life to ensure a beneficial outcome. And oddly enough, that same system of ideas is found in the Mississippi Valley. In the Amazon, it involves particularly ayahuasca and the belief that the ayahuasca journey takes you to the afterlife realm and a journey along the Milky Way. In the Mississippi Valley, the mound builder sites up and down the Mississippi Valley, particularly Moundville in Alabama, exactly the same system of religious ideas associated with geometrical constructions, that on death, the soul, they're very specific, ascends to the constellation of Orion, transits from the constellation of Orion to the Milky Way, makes a journey along the Milky Way, which they call the Path of Souls, and encounters challenges and ordeals where the soul must account for the life that it has lived. Then we go to Egypt, and what do we find? The same system of ideas. The soul must rise up to the constellation of Orion. There's a narrow shaft cut through the southern side of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which targets directly the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt. Widely accepted as a star shaft or a soul shaft. The soul would rise up through that shaft, get to the constellation of Orion, which stands by the banks of the Milky Way. It would then transit to the Milky Way, which the ancient Egyptians called the Winding Waterway, and it would make a journey along the Milky Way where it would be confronted by challenges and ordeals. Very similar idea to the Tucano, very similar idea to the Mississippi Valley. As far as we know, none of these cultures were in contact with one another. Either we're dealing with a huge, unbelievable, extraordinarily detailed coincidence involving architecture and ideas, or we're looking at a legacy that was inherited in all of these different places from a remote common ancestor. And I believe that that's what we're looking at.
What do we think the people from the ancient Mississippi Valley, that culture, what do we think they were using? If they weren't using ayahuasca, or do we think that's what they were using?
Well, that's an interesting question, whether visionary substances are the only way to get into altered states of consciousness. And I would say they are definitely not. Of course, there are visionary substances which are used in Native American vision quests. I've had the privilege of the peyote ceremony with the Native American Church.
I've never done that. What is that like?
I loved it, actually. I thought it was amazing. It doesn't overpower you in the way that DMT or ayahuasca does. It's much gentler. It's much more. You feel much more integrated and connected with nature. Your thought processes are quite clear. It felt just like a very beautiful and healing experience. And I love the ceremony that I'm inside a teepee with 30 or 40 other people, and there are specific roles that are assigned to those different individuals. One will keep the door, another will be responsible for the fire, which is a work of art in itself. Just gazing into that fire and the glowing embers is enough to induce an altered state of consciousness on its own. Incredible drumming, which drives your state of consciousness into a kind of peak experience. This is a technology for accessing other levels of experience and other levels of reality, and it's clear that the Native Americans had a number of advanced technologies in this area. The sun dance doesn't use a substance, but it uses austerity, it uses pain to drive an altered state of consciousness. The objective in every case seems to be, let's just for a while get ourselves out of the narrow, rigid frame of the alert problem-solving state of consciousness. We all need that. It's incredibly useful. Hunter-gatherers need it just as much as people in cities need it. But it's not the only state of consciousness available to human beings, and maybe that's one of the big mistakes that we're making in our culture, and was not made in shamanistic societies.
That is a really interesting breakdown. That maybe that is one of the big mistakes we're making in our culture. When people point to the problems that we have in this country, one of the problems we have is our inability to connect with each other, or to recognize that we're all sharing this space and time together, and instead wanting to uphold our own religious or ideological ideas as being the only one way to get going, the only one way to get through. And one of the things that I've found with these psychedelic experiences, it really makes ideologies seem, if not preposterous, at the very least insignificant in comparison to human experiences.
Absolutely.
The experience of camaraderie and friendship and love. You realize, like, oh, this is what's important.
This is what's important. It's really about.
Not enforcing your ideas or pushing them on other people and forcing people to behave the way you behave, but instead love.
And think about religious ideas, which cause so much division, so much chaos, so much hatred, so much fear, so much suspicion in the world today. Is it really what we want to do as human beings? Simply to accept a package of ideas that were believed in by our ancestors, to accept them whole, without question, as absolute fact, which we regard as such authoritative fact that in some cases we're willing to be deeply unpleasant to people who hold different views, or perhaps even kill them. We've had this, this recent event in Sri Lanka, primarily a religiously motivated terrorist event. It happens all over the world. People feel so convinced that the inherited package of ideas that they had nothing to do with creating and that they have never questioned, they're so convinced that those ideas are right that in extreme cases they're actually prepared to kill other human beings who hold different ideas. Are they so insecure in their own beliefs that they're prepared to go to that level of actually murdering another human being who holds it? They're so threatened by the other beliefs that other human beings hold. So it's an abnegation of our responsibility as human beings. We should be questioning things. We should not be accepting packages of ideas intact, fully formed, and using them to drive the way we behave towards one another. That was part of the human story, but we need to move on from that. I mean, it's a very dangerous situation in a very complex modern world with billions of human beings on the planet, to have these kind of energies being generated where certain groups of people are saying, we are absolutely right and you are absolutely wrong. We are superior, you are inferior. This is a very, very dangerous path that we're on, and it needs to be changed. Personally, I know this is not a comment that will go down well with many people, but I am strongly opposed to nationalism. I don't see any virtue in nationalism. It is an accident of birth which nation you were born in. It was nothing that you did for your own merit. You didn't earn that. You were born by accident in a particular nation. Why should we automatically feel that other people who were born by accident in that particular nation have something special in common with us, and that we together are a group who are much more important than other groups of people? I've been privileged to spend my life traveling around the world, living with communities all over the world, and one thing that really comes across to me strongly, it should be a cliche, and yet it's not, is that we are all one family, that humans are intimately interconnected all around the world, that you can go to the remotest area of the Amazon jungle and find the same hopes, the same fears, the same dreams that we have in industrialized cities, shared by the hunter-gatherers in the middle of the Amazon. So our similarities as human beings and what we share in common at the emotional level and at the level of love and at the level of heart are far more important than our differences that are defined by the nation or the political group in which we grew up in. And when I say I'm against nationalism, I need also to make clear that does not mean, and I hope I'm not taken out of context by others who are listening to this, that does not mean I'm in favor of world government. I detest governments. That's another thing we need to grow out of. We don't need governments anymore. If we have them, they should have a very minimal role in our society. I think it's possible for the human race to relate as one family without leaders and governments who are exploiting the worst aspects of our character.